Welcome back to another edition of Fight IQ presented by RotoWire. I am your host, the Daily Fantasy Sniper, and on deck we have UFC Chile. The main event is Kamaru Usman and Damian Maia, and with me as always are the co-hosts, really the more important guys, the analysts. It is Chris Olsen at Real Chris Olsen and Joe at Sun Joe. They're kind of interchangeable. Guys, exciting card last week. I don't think we did too bad for ourselves if your name is Joe or Sean. Chris had a bit of a rough go.
I actually, my ass was saved in cash. I guess I could say ass. My ass was saved by cash. I mean, obviously I was disappointed, as Chris pointed out, with Nick Hine. But really what hurt me and a lot of people in GPPs was our good friend, the diaper boy, Junior Albini. But, you called your hot take was the over on the number of finishes. And you got that cold, buddy.
There were a lot of subs. My favorite, I had Davi Ramos everywhere. He saved me to where GPPs, I had too much Albini to have a good night. But Davi Ramos, that back take was one of the best things I've seen in a long time. That was, as somebody who loves BJJ, that was one of the highlights of the night for me tonight. That was pretty fun, but we got to get to this card, UFC Chile. I think some interesting matchmaking here. Overall, an interesting card, not a lot of stars, but not the worst fight night card that the UFC has put together. Before we get into the fights, we'll do our plugs real quick, guys. This podcast is brought to you by RotoWire. Make sure and go to rotowire.com/free. Check out all their premium content, free for 10 days. No credit card required. We'll plug ourselves. I'm at the DFS Sniper 1S. I told you at Real Chris Olsen. Get all his content on RotoWire. Joe is at Sun Tzu. Check out his other podcast on the Daily Fantasy MMA channel called Creating Alpha. Just go ahead and follow my YouTube page at the DFS Sniper. Do tons of great MMA and soccer content. I appreciate all of you suffering through those intros. They're important to us. We appreciate all the support. Let's get to these fights, especially I want to jump into the main event. I always ask before we start which direction we go. We'll get to the main event because it's one that I definitely have a hot take on, and I'm looking forward to starting a few fights today. It should be fun. I think people really enjoy when we all argue, and it gives us something to talk about afterwards. So let's see if we can find some of those. I don't suspect it'll be in our first fight. It is Felipe Silva, 9,400, taking on Claudio Puelles at 6,800. I have Silva smashing Puelles. Puelles could be good at some point. He's 22. I think he's too green. Silva is not a world beater, but he's worlds better than Puelles. Joe, how do you see in this first fight? I think it's going to be a rather important one for GPPs.
Ooh, great recovery.
Right?
9.4K on DraftKings. I know you neglected to mention that. 9.4K for Silvia. This is interesting. Our boy Claudio was, he was in the finalist for TUF. He lost to Martin Bravo. He just succumbed to Bravo's pressure. Bravo subsequently has not looked that great. As it relates, his next fight, he was scheduled to be fed just anecdotally to Sage Norcutt. Sage Norcutt in that fight, and he got injured, either real or imagined. So he was not like Norcutt's next like UFC softball. He could improve. I mean, he's interesting. I mean, Silva is the guy you want. I mean, obviously his last fight against Tasimov, I mean, who doesn't get finished, on the feet by Tasimov? I mean, if you throw that one out, he's actually had, he's got a pretty decent track record. I think he's worth paying up for. Again, GPPs, cash. I don't think you can go wrong. I think because he's in the middle of Tatiana and Usman, that he might be a little bit lower owned because those two are getting pretty much all the buzz. So I don't think you could go wrong as in GPPs or cash as a punt off of either Usman or Suarez.
Yeah, I'm actually toying with the idea of jamming in all those three Usman, Suarez, and Silva, because as we go on, I think there's a few punts that are really interesting, especially for cash. Chris, what's your exposure going to be to this fight?
I pretty much agree with your general takes on it. I will say that I think that Puelles is a better fighter than we saw in the Martin Bravo fight. I think he kept trying to, he kept grabbing single legs and then not really finishing them, just sort of extending them upward. And he's a better wrestler than that. On the show, he double-legged against the fence a lot. He has decent top control. And I think Silva, I expect Silva to do the same thing, just pressure, and either storm the castle or get him out of there. I don't expect Puelles to do the Tyson thing and hit the nice counter. But we have to say that most of Silva's fights are only round one, only one-round fights. So if Puelles can get a couple takedowns and maybe grind him out a little bit, could he tire him out? Could he find a victory here in top control? I don't think it's, out of the question. I think the prices are skewed in the wrong direction for that reason. My lean would still be Silva, just because we've already seen Puelles succumb to that kind of pressure. But I think at 6,800, if you're looking for a punt play to get all those juicy stars in on top of the card, I think maybe you could do a little worse. I don't know.
I think there are better punts to look for. I get it, because it's similar to how I was looking at Bogdanovic last week. It didn't pay off, but it was one of those, they're two low-level fighters and one's a big favorite. You take a chance on a punt. I don't think I'll be going there. A place I will be going with pretty heavy exposure is our next fight, because this line is stupid. Frankie Saenz, 9,100 against Henry Briones, 7,100 as of right now on Friday night. The line for this fight is Frankie Saenz, the minus 320 favorite. Frankie Saenz, the minus 320 favorite. Did you hear me? Frankie Saenz, the minus 320 favorite. Guys, he's on a 4-fight losing streak. He lost to Mirab Ivalishvili. He lost. He's lost 4 straight fights. I know Briones isn't a world beater either, but God, plus 290 against Frankie Saenz, sign me up. And I think Briones, he throws heavy enough for 135. The knockout's in play. You got two 37-year-old fighters. Briones is the one who's going to get a finish. I know he's fought just killers. Frankie Saenz is losing. Ivalishvili is a good prospect, but other than that, he's losing to Augusto Mendez, Eddie Wineland, whereas you got Frankie Saenz who's in there against Douglas Silva de Andrade, Hani Yaya, just way better names, and he hasn't looked terrible. I like Henry Briones a lot as a punt. Chris, if I swayed you at all from getting off of Claudio Puelles and maybe moving a little more exposure to Henry Briones.
Well, you didn't have to persuade me all that much in the first place. I kind of like Briones here too. I like his combination work to the body and the head. I think he's a good technical striker, and we know that he's otherworldly tough. He had to be put down. The fights where he gets put down, it just takes ungodly punishment. But here's what is going through my little head right now. Because I think a lot of us are going to have that same view where, Briones is the price is too skewed. So let's go Briones instead of Frankie Saenz. And for that reason, I'm going to say a couple positive things about Frankie Saenz here. He does get hurt a lot, which is obviously not a positive thing. But what I would say is that everybody who's tried to take Henry Briones down has pretty much done it. In fact, I think he literally has been taken down at least once in every one of his UFC fights. I believe I have that correct. And, he pretty much just concedes to it. He lets himself get backed up and lets himself get taken down. Now Frankie Saenz hasn't done much in the way of takedowns recently, but I think that might just be because of the opponents. We talked about Ivalishvili, who's the takedown artist himself. We talked about Augusto Mendez, who has the world-class jiu-jitsu. So if Frankie Saenz can come in here and dedicate himself to his wrestling game, I think he can probably get a win here. And I think if he does and you have him, you're going to be, pretty overweight to the field. And for that reason, I think he could pay off in GPPs.
Joe, how are you looking at this?
Okay, so there is a cautionary tale here with an indirect parallel. So the cautionary tale is there was a fighter in the UFC by the name of James Tahuna. And James Tahuna was fighting this guy named Steve Basse. And everybody commented, even though Tahuna was coming off a losing streak of 3 or 4, all of being finished, everybody was commenting on how the guys that knocked Tahuna out were so much better than the guys that Basse had fought. So Tahuna was a 2-1 or greater favorite going into this fight with Steve Basse and got knocked out cold. Now, where's the parallel? What a lot of people might not know about Briones is that he was a Mexican League hockey player. Yes, apparently they do play hockey in Mexico. He was a Mexican hockey player. Now, I'm not saying let's not take a few shares of Briones because there isn't a whole lot to like, sub 8K. But, the narrative where, yeah, he's been getting finished and getting his ass kicked by much better fighters. And again, I don't know that they're that much. They are better, but, Mendez, Eddie Wineland, not bad. I mean, so it's a cautionary tale. I would say take some shares of Briones, but I also think it's, Saenz could be a little bit interesting because he's not going to be, I don't think he's going to be highly owned in that, there's so many 9K plus fighters. He might not be that highly owned. So I would say take a few shares of him as well, especially in mass entry GPPs.
Yeah, I think Saenz is going to come in under 15% for sure. So he's interesting in that way. I can get on board there, but I pulled up Briones. He scored 34 points against Silva de Andrade. He fought Cody Garbrandt. He went to decision. At least
impressive.
Even if he doesn't, if Cody Garbrandt doesn't finish him, I mean, I know Silva de Andrade is. I don't see Saenz getting a finish. For 7,100, I think he's in play everywhere. Another fight that I think you're going to need exposure to both sides is Enrique Barzola, 8,900 against Brandon Davis, 7,300. I've been saying all week, I think Barzola gets the takedowns. I'm not sure Davis can stop them, but he has good movement. And as much as I like Barzola, in this matchup, if he can't get the takedown, Davis is incredibly dangerous on the feet. So for 7,300, Davis is in play because he's live to a win. I don't think he's the most dead dog on the card. And Barzola, if he wins, it's going to be wrestling based. So I like both sides of this fight. Joe, do you have a strong lead one way or the other?
Yeah, I mean, look, I like Barzola. I like that he left. He's a Peruvian fighter who left Peru to go study at American or do his camps at American Top Team. We all know that ATT has got some killers both on the mat and standing. My issue with Barzola is that he is a takedown machine, but he can't control the fighters once he takes them down. So it's a lot of rinsing and repeating, which is not necessarily bad for DraftKings, but if every time you let a striker like Davis up, that you're just subjecting yourself to more danger and taking yourself away from your strength. I like Barzola. I probably like him a little bit more in cash than I do in GPPs. I do like Barzola, but again, I think it's worthwhile having a few shares of Davis. People are pointing to the Bochniak fight where Bochniak could take Davis down, and people keep forgetting that Davis was hurt going into that fight, hurt to the extent that he could not grapple in his camp. But he did not, he's one of those Mississippi mean guys, trains with Alan Belcher, did not want to pull out of the fight because he couldn't grapple during his camp. So he was a little bit more susceptible to takedowns in that fight. And then we saw what a good striker he is in the Peterson fight, the next fight, where he threw a fair amount of significant strikes, had pretty decent takedown defense. Don't get me wrong, I like Barzola, but I think, to your point, Sean, that it's worth having a few shares of Davis in case the rinse repeat, maybe he catches him with something.
Chris, you got Davis or Barzola?
I think we're getting a little desperate here, guys. I think we're getting a little any port in the storm here. I get that we need to be looking for dogs, and there aren't that many that are that appealing. But I mean, I just don't know what people see in Brandon Davis. I agree with you guys 100% that Barzola is going to get the takedowns. I also think his ground and pound is pretty good. I think it's underrated, even if it leads to a lack of control sometimes. And I don't really see Brandon Davis as being all that dangerous on the feet. I just looked it up quick here. He's got 2 stoppages by strikes. I mean, so that's not really, and it confirmed what I thought, because when I was watching his fights, I was thinking to myself, well, it doesn't look like he hits very hard. So I don't really think that that Brandon Davis is all that live here. I think he has a path to victory if he can come forward on Barzola, because we've seen that freeze him before in some of his fights. But Brandon Davis doesn't really do that. He sort of just likes to. I mean, he'll take the center and he'll stand in space, but he doesn't really actively pressure in a way, that I think is going to give Barzola issues. So I'm actually really confident in Barzola here, and I think that he should win this pretty easily. I like him everywhere.
The one thing I take issue with there is you can't knock the power of a 145er. Like, they're not many of them hit really hard. It's more the volume. I think he's more technical than Barzola. I think this fight just comes down to the takedowns. And Barzola could very well. There's a couple underdogs I'm going to have a bunch of exposure to, and a bunch of others I'm going to mix and match with my favorites. I put Davis on that list. Speaking of that list, Gabriel Benítez, 8,500, taking on Humberto Bandenay, 7,700. Benítez riding high after his win over another Mississippian guy, in which he was also bit in that fight by Jason Knight. Never have seen that before. Hopefully I don't see it again. Bandenay, this line keeps expanding. I meant to have it pulled up. It is, Benítez is up to minus 215, so you're probably going to get a little bit of line value there. I think Bandenay's getting overlooked a little bit, but I think he's a GPP play only. I think he's going to blitz and try and get Benítez down. We've seen Benítez deal with that. I think he gets a decision. I'm just not sure the line should keep expanding as it is. Chris, are you on board with the line and the pricing in this fight?
Pretty much. I would take issue with one small thing you said there. I don't think Bandenay is going to blitz and try for takedowns. I think the way he caught
not takedowns. He's just going to blitz, and I think he's going to blitz Benítez and pressure and try and throw heavy.
Well, okay, but I just think the way he caught who'd he catch in his last fight?
Bravo.
The way he caught Bravo in his last fight is the way he likes to fight in general. He gives ground and he tries to catch you coming in with something hard. And I think that's the way he fights in general. And I think that's going to allow Benítez, with his athleticism, to sort of pick him apart here a little bit. The one issue I would have is that, Benítez, he doesn't always retract when he throws his strikes, and it leads to him getting countered hard sometimes. He got countered hard in the Jason Knight fight, which was otherwise, a pretty clean sweep for him. So I'm not ruling out that Bandenay can hit him with something hard at some point, but I think that failing that, I think Mugli is going to have a pretty easy time here.
I'm picking Benítez as well. I just think Bandenay, the only way he wins is by knockout. So that's why I'm willing to throw some shares there. What I'm worried about Benítez is the scoring. Even when he wins, I don't think he scores particularly highly. For that reason, I'm a little worried about Benítez. How about you, Joe?
Okay, so this is one of those situations where I liked the dog more in the beginning of the week. And unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, the number one odds value on the slate is Benítez right now, right? So that's the number one odds value. A couple of narratives on Bandenay. One, he's a Peruvian fighter, but if at least if you are to believe Tapology, which I tend to believe, he is now doing his camps at Team Oyama. Now, Oyama is in Orange County. It's no King's MMA, but it's a decent camp. It's got, among others, like Louis Smolka, Perez, like a couple of female fighters like Esparza. It's not a bad. It's definitely better than Team Pitbull in Peru. So he's young. He should be getting better. I like your idea of using him in GPPs. It's one of these deals where I've kind of lessened my exposure to him as the week got longer. I will come right out and say that I like this card for mass entry GPPs. So I currently have 147 lineups in the $8 contest. I have 3 more that I'm going to fill out by hand. So I have exposure to pretty much all the fighters, and I lessened my exposure as the odds value got so much in Benitez's favor as the week went on.
Interesting. You know, the odds value can burn people. It's not the end all. I know you know that it's actually a place where sometimes you can get some leverage. I still have nightmares from Eric Shelton a few months ago. That's one of those that I changed my mind and I paid for it. Speaking of, I have no good segue for this fight, but it's one I'm really interested in, and it's the few times I'm really interested in a women's MMA fight. I think there's a couple good ones on this card. We have Poliana Botelho, 8,700 against Syuri Kondo, 7,500. Poliana Botelho faced Pearl Gonzalez last time out, and Pearl Gonzalez wanted nothing to do with her on the feet. Botelho throws hard and is a Brazilian wrestling champion. Pearl Gonzalez, they stalled up against the cage. Botelho landed the better strikes. Thankfully, the judges gave her the decision. Syuri Kondo was in a 3-round fight against, I think it was Cham Mi Jian, and she just is a volume striker. Throws, which is DraftKings gold. In terms of if you're going to be a striker, you need to be that kind of striker. So what's interesting here is, does Poliana land a bigger strike and put down Kondo, or does Kondo volume strike her way to a win? The third option is Botelho uses her wrestling to get a win. I see this one playing out in the feet, and for that reason, Kondo and cash makes a lot of sense to me as I'm looking for punts. Joe, I know you're a big on playing GPP this week. I'm assuming you're still playing heavily enough in cash. Are you going to have any Syuri Kondo?
Yeah, I am. I like her in cash. Here's the narrative on this fight. One, you mentioned Pearl Gonzalez. Well, Pearl Gonzalez is a U.S. fighter, so when I say she got her exit visa, it was from the UFC as a result of her fight against Botelho. She exhibited horrible fight IQ in that fight. I mean, really, it couldn't have been worse. I mean, the takedowns that she was going for were horrible. She wasn't doing awful on the feet. I just didn't know what Pearl Gonzalez was thinking in that fight. The narrative on Kondo was interesting because if you remember watching that fight, there was a lot of debate over her being credited with so many significant strikes. Now, she actually threw a lot of punches, but the idea that so many of what she threw was considered significant was in very much debate during that fight. Now, again, to her favor, I don't know that we're going to have an experienced core of judges in Chile, for MMA. So, it could work in her favor in terms of how they look at volume and how they look at, obviously Fight Metrics scores significant strikes, but it's going to be interesting. I do like Kondo and cash. I have some exposure to Botelho, probably in that price range. One of my lower owned in that price range, but I do like Kondo and cash.
Chris, Botelho, Kondo, volume striker or Brazilian wrestling champion with power?
Volume striker, please. I think that Paulo Botelho sort of reminds me of. It was tough because we couldn't really glean a lot from that Pearl Gonzalez fight. That might be the literal worst fight I've ever seen. But her last fight before that, I kind of liken her counter striking to Thiago Silva a little bit, who we just saw get knocked out by David Branch. Because what happens when you rush her, or at least it did in this fight, is she just sort of throws a bunch of strikes to try to get you to back away and scare you off. And what ended up happening in that fight was she ate a right hand and got dropped to the mat. She ended up winning that fight later as a retirement. But I think that if you pressure her, she can fold or she can panic. And I think Kondo is good at doing that. I think she has surprising power for her size. She's got a good overhand right. I'm pretty sure she wobbled Jung in that fight as well in the first round. So I really see the more technical striker just bringing it to bear here. I don't really have a whole lot to say about Botelho's wrestling. From the footage I saw, I haven't seen a lot of it. She seems to be at least a competent positional grappler. But I think I'm usually in these spots when you have the technical striker versus sort of the more wild all over the place striker, I go with the more technical striker. That's going to be the case here. And the fact that she's, the cheaper fighter as well only sweetens the pot. So I'm going Kondo.
Alexandre Pantoja, 8,200. Brandon Moreno, 8,000. A rematch from season 20 of Tough, where Moreno, remember guys, Moreno lost that fight. Everyone seems to remember it like he beat Pantoja. He did lose the fight. He's done better in the UFC. They have a common opponent, Dustin Ortiz. And I want to throw out that Brandon Moreno, from what I remember, lost the first round pretty handily against Ortiz and then caught him with the head kick in the second and got the submission. Pantoja is coming off a win against Neil Syuri that it's hard to count much towards. Really interesting. I think Pantoja is just overall a little better. I think Moreno, while having some good wins, I think the sub is really his best path to victory. And I don't see him pulling it off too often here against Pantoja, who I think is a solid UFC fighter. And in that, at 125, makes you a top 10 guy. I'll take Pantoja here. I'm struggling with how much ownership to put towards this fight. I keep waffling. Chris, how much of this fight are you going to have if you even agree with my take there?
I actually agree with your take 100% for once, and I think that I'm gonna have I think I'm gonna have a sizable amount of Pantoja here, as you've mentioned. We've already seen this fight. Not only that, but judging on how the two fighters have fought recently, I don't see it going that much different. We know that, which is turning into a theme for me here, I guess, but we know that Moreno has trouble with pressure. When he gets pressured, he just tends to back up straight and then try to exit off the cage to the side. What Pantoja was doing, it seemed like he was comfortable eating strikes because he wasn't really concerned about the power to try to trade. And then in the second round, he said, "Okay, well, let me just get to the grappling," and then that ended the show. As you said in the Dustin Ortiz fight, Sean, he did catch the head kick, but before that, he was getting soundly outworked. He spent most of the first round either getting back up or trying to fight hands. And I think that Pantoja is just going to be the stronger, better grappler. I like Moreno's back take game. I think it's opportunistic and it's slick and it's good, but I don't think it's better than Pantoja's. So that's really the issue for me here is even in the areas where I think Moreno is good, I think Pantoja is better. And for that reason, I'm going to have mostly Pantoja here.
Joe, you see this rematch going any differently?
It's the trifecta here. Again, this was on Tough was 1 versus 16, right? Pantoja was 1 and Nick Lovin, Moreno was 16. What's interesting is that, the narrative on Moreno coming into the Ultimate Fighter is here's a guy that actually lost an MMA fight to a fighter with one leg. You could not have scripted Moreno's entry into the UFC any better. He catches one fighter, Smoka, in a freak, sub. You already gave the story about Ortiz, and then he gets a main event in his own country and gets totally worked by Sergio Pettis. Now, there's no shame in getting worked by Sergio Pettis, but to both your and Chris's point, Pantoja is better everywhere. I mean, he's a BJJ black belt. I can't see him letting Moreno get an advantageous position in grappling, sticking his neck out, giving up his back. At 8,200, I like Pantoja a lot. I will have a fair amount of him in mass entry GPPs. I will have a few shares of Moreno because, the sun can shine on the back of a dog's ass more than once. And I think you need to account for that eventuality. So I will have some shares of Moreno as well. But I really do like Pantoja here.
Yes, sorry, I just got distracted by I pulled up Twitter and got some incoming fight news. It looks like we're going to have, and I got tilted by it because it's Alexei Oleinik and Mark Hunt could be the plan.
Yes. All right, let's do it.
Dear God. Let's distract me before somebody burn my eyes out. Zach Cummings, 8,400, taking on Michel Prazeres, 7,800. A fight that I'm interested in your guys' takes on this one because I like the massively undersized Prazeres because I don't think Zach Cummings is that great. Zach Cummings, a line I threw out in another podcast this week, he was recently knocked out by a bathtub, and he's got a win over Nathan Coy. So that's what he's done lately. Michel Prazeres, I get it. He's a lightweight who has not made weight by a lot. So he's fighting at welterweight, and he's fighting a really big welterweight in Zach Cummings. I'm wondering if the size helps him get in on takedowns. He's good BJJ. It's the gas tank that concerns me. There's no way I'm touching this fight in cash games, but I think in GPP, it's in the mid-range. This is one that I'd be shocked if you're not loading up on, Joe, how much exposure you have.
Not as much as you think. I mean, look, what would you say if I asked you the last 4 wins that that Cummings got in the octagon? What do you think the average? If you took the average of his betting line odds in those 4 fights, what would you say they were?
Well, he was a huge underdog to somebody ridiculous, Nicholas Dalby, wasn't he?
No, he was never an underdog in any of his last 4 fights.
Really?
So I'm going to tell you, his odds were, if you averaged his odds of his last 4 fights, you get pretty close to minus 300. Okay.
What was it in the Dalby fight? It was
like 115. That was the closest.
Okay, I thought
he was like minus 500, minus 400, minus 115, and minus 170. Right. So he, again. Now here we go with. Okay. Well, look at his. There's 2 ways to look at this. Look at his competition. Right. He beat the guys he was supposed to beat. Lost to the guys who were good. Right. He loses to Gunnar Nelson. Right. That's one of his losses. Right. He loses to Ponzinibbio. Right. That's another one of his losses. Right. Now, you got Prazeres, on the other hand, who never makes weight at 155, is undersized, has a distinctive height and reach advantage coming into this fight, who is coming off of a winning streak as well, of which 2 of his last 4 wins, he was the underdog. Now, again, Cummings is also a very large welterweight. He's actually fought at middleweight. He's missed weight before at welterweight. So, this is really, in terms of size that's being given up, what he's going to be at fight night. I mean, he could be close to 200 pounds, on fight night. Now, Prazeres made weight easily, as I hoped he would have, considering he was given 15 pounds, additional 15 pounds to work with. Usually the lower center of gravity helps with takedowns. Cummings' takedown defense is about 66%, which is pretty darn good. I don't want that much of this fight. I mean, I probably am higher weighted to Cummings just because of the narrative, even though I realize that he's been beating up cans for the most part, and Prazeres has actually had a lot tougher fights. I will have some of Prazeres here. It's going to be an interesting stylistic matchup. It's a fight that I really want to watch. I don't know that either one of these guys is going to be on the winning lineup, but I think it's an interesting fight to watch.
That's interesting because I see this playing out as Tractor gets a ton of takedowns or the size advantage is too much and Cummings gets the finish. With the first being more likely to me. Chris, how you seeing this one play out?
Well, I'm kind of disappointed. I'm looking for an opportunity to scream and yell with you guys, and we're all agreeing with each other. But I like Prazeres too. I've been looking around the internet. I see a lot of people on comments here. I think it's just they're wondering if the power is going to translate. They're wondering if the strength is going to translate.
And people hate Michel Prazeres. People just hate him.
That too, but I really don't see it as a problem. As Joe mentioned, he's fought up weight classes before, and I also just think he's going to try to put a pace on Cummings that really hasn't had to deal with in his last few fights. He's a good fighter. He's got a good straight left hand, but I just think that he's not really aggressive enough as a striker, and I think that Prazeres is just going to rush him. I think those takedowns are going to be there, and I think I don't know. It's weird to me that people like Cummings here because I don't know that he necessarily scores too highly.
Well, I think it's going to be a low-scoring fight, which is why I don't want a lot of it. I think the fight has the potential to be a low-scoring decision.
Well, I think it does on one side, but I think that Prazeres could get some takedowns and mat returns here on his way to a sub. So I like it from that perspective. I guess all 3 of us are going to be eating the same amount of crow here if the prevailing wisdom turns out to be the case. But I think the strength is going to play just fine, and I like Prazeres here.
It's interesting because I think people just dislike Michel Prazeres, and I get it, but You got to take that out, and it's the size advantage. And this will I agree with Joe. This is one of the fights I'm more interested in watching. Along with this next fight, because it has the potential to be a real breakout performance for someone. Vicente Luque is 8,800 taking on Chad Laprise 7,400. Chad Laprise, who was rocked by Galore Bafando last time out. Vicente Luque is putting guys out like Bilal Muhammad. He is legit. He's choking out Nico Price with I think there was an anaconda choke. Might have been a Darce, one of the two.
One of them. Same thing.
He is. Well, depends which side the arm's on. But
all right.
Either way, I'm just throwing it out there. I think Luque has the potential to be a real force in this division. He's somebody I'm very high on. Chad Laprise has good wrestling. His chin is questionable. It's been a little better since he moved up weight classes. I'm interested in where this fight is going to go. I'm fading Laprise personally because I think he's going to sleep, but I don't trust his chin. And I like other dogs in that area much more, like we've already talked about. Kondo and Briones will take a lot of that ownership, and we'll get to Cannonier in a bit. And Canetti. There's a lot of dogs that I think are in play. So I'm going to fade Laprise. Chris, are you going to play tons of Chad Laprise? You all in on the Canadian here?
Well, the first thing I want to say is, isn't it a shame that Galore Bafando is no longer in the UFC? I thought he was fun.
He got cut? I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's one of the more questionable cuts that I can remember. Maybe he was trying to
questionable because I want to make money on DraftKings.
But getting away from that a little bit, this is kind of a back and forth for me. My initial reaction was, of course, to go to Luque. But, and I always like when a guy wins a fight, loses a fight recently back-to-back, and then we can study it because I get to see what he was like when he was winning and what he was like when he was losing. In the Nico Price fight, we saw a lot of Luque using his leg kicks, and especially that low calf kick, to set up his hands so that Nico had so much to worry about that he was just getting tagged with hard shots with the pressure. But then you see in the Leon Edwards fight, he basically just got tired. He did a lot of grappling, and he got tired. And I think that Laprise is interesting because he will not be a stationary target. He'll be moving around a lot. He'll be sticking and moving a lot. He also likes to work the body, which could exacerbate the problems with the gas tank. He's a decent wrestler. He could try to grind him down that way. I still think I'm going to give a slight lean to Luque just because of the pressure and the fast combinations and the power. But I wouldn't count Laprise out completely here. I think he might be able to work around him for a round or two, maybe get him tired, and then get to a win that way, maybe even a late finish.
I mean, I'm just disappointed now. We talked about Galore Bafando. I need to go watch that slam KO over Charlie Ward. Joe, is Luque going to put down Laprise here and make a run at the title here? I really think he has that kind of potential.
Look, I've been burned before by Chad Laprise, so I will have some. I mean, I see this as a GPP fight. So I've been burned before by Chad Laprise, tri-star point fighter. I will have a few shares of him. I do like Luque. There is no shame in losing to Rocky Edwards. I think Edwards is going to soundly beat Cerrone. I believe in Singapore.
As long as he's a dick to him.
Yeah,
it has to be a dick.
That's right. Yeah.
I think he will soundly beat Cerrone. I also think he is far better fighter than Darren Till. In the weight class. So that's kind of the fight I want to see. I don't think that Till's going to get by Thompson, but I like Rocky Edwards a lot. I think he's a great fighter, so I don't think there's any shame there. Again, there's just so much to look at in that tier. I do like Luque. I will probably be on weight to him relative to the field. I mean, on weight to a tad over or a tad under, depending on what that number comes in at. So I do like Luque a lot. It's, I'm uncomfortable about playing it in cash because I do see a path to victory for Laprise. I will have a few shares of him in GPPs, but that's about as far as I'm willing to go.
Let's bring up a fight I just assume Joe is amped to talk about. Andrea KGB Lee 9,200 taking on Veronica Macedo, 7,000. I have a little bit of a rant for this fight. I think the UFC is trying to set up KGB Lee with a win because she's super marketable. She's pretty. I get it. She's good. This is a miss by the UFC. Macedo is not that bad. They're holding a loss to Ashley Evans Smith against her. She took that fight on short notice up a weight class. Macedo, she's also pretty. She speaks tons of languages. She's a young fighter. She's got a fun Taekwondo style, spin kicks. She could almost be an international type Paige Van Zandt with, I'm not going to go there, Paige Van Zandt, but with more skills. I think she's better. This fight to me comes down to a Taekwondo fighter in Macedo with a little bit of BJJ training against KGB Lee, who is more well-rounded and has a Muay Thai style. I lean KGB Lee, but for cash at 7,000, I think this is one of the bigger misprices on the card because everyone's so high on Andrea KGB Lee. I get it. I like Macedo more than most people. I think it goes to a decision, and for cash, it's almost exactly what I'm looking for. So, Joe, take it away. You are the WMMA whisperer.
Yeah, I've been called the chick whisperer, and I've actually, Brett Apley, our good friend, on his Rotor Grinders podcast, accused me of having watched her fights going back to her teenage years, which is not true. I do watch Invicta. I have seen quite a few KGB Lee fights. I like her all-around game. She does have moments where her fight IQ is not the best. She does have a loss to Roxanne Modafferi. She has been on the shelf for 6 months because of the USADA rule, where you have to be, in the system for 6 months before you can fight. I'm also not crazy about her camp in Louisiana. She comes from a really small camp. Honestly, I think, if we were looking at this purely from a looks perspective, I think Macedo is actually just as good looking as her. I think the line is, and everything you say, I said in terms of the UFC marketing her, wanting to get behind her, blonde, Southern accent, it's got the good KGB gimmick going. No way, no how, minus 320. I just can't see it. I'm going to be underexposed to the field in GPPs. I will have some shares of Mikado. There's just not enough narrative on her. I mean, everything you said is true, but none of it actually relates to fighting. Multiple languages, speaks, fluent English.
She's got a good Taekwondo base.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I haven't seen enough of her. I mean, I'd like to think that, it's probably going to go to a decision, and she will be able to earn her salary at 7K. But, I'm probably going to be underweight to this entire fight to the field.
That's probably a good way to go, and I like Macedo as a punt. Chris, I mean, it's going to be hard to follow Joe talking about a WMMA fight, but give it a shot.
Well. I guess some weeks we all just have to pick Amanda Cooper, don't we? I
was going to save that for Tatiana Suarez and Alexa Grasso, but I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah. Well, I just want to know how the grass is growing on the other side there. But I will say that look, I love KGB here. I don't really see Macedo's path to victory here, short of rolling for a leg lock and getting it, because KGB is positionally. Sometimes she's very positionally poor. She'll lock up sometimes and go for a takedown, and I almost feel like she doesn't really care if she's going to land on the top or on the bottom, as long as they're going to go to the ground. We've seen that before, but I don't even see Macedo taking advantage of that, because KGB is going to be quite a bit bigger than she is. So I think that you talked about her Taekwondo base. Okay, I mean, that also includes some spin kicks which could get her out of position and get her back taken, that like we saw in the Ashley Evans Smith fight. I just don't really see her path here. I think she's tough. I think she holds decent position when she gets to the ground, but I just think Lee is way better as a striker. And even if she doesn't have that fight IQ in the grappling, she's still really good in the clinch, which is where that fight with Ashley Evans Smith ended up quite often. And I think she finishes her again here. So I'm going with the high chalk play, the KGB to take her out.
Just in that range, I think she's my least favorite play in that range. Although she probably is the smarter pick to win the fight. And finally, we are in UFC Chile, and then we get to our first Chilean fighter, our only one on the card, Diego Rivas, 8,600, taking on Guido Canetti, 7,600. These two, I give credit where it's due. I think it was half the battle I was listening to, where they said these guys were roommates at one point. I heard that somewhere. I think it was half the battle.
Really, I didn't hear that. Wow.
I think that's what it was. And it's really interesting when two friends fight. You get these weird, stinky fights. And Diego Rivas he's not the best fighter. He's 2-1. You know, he's got wins over Nohad Lahat and Rodolfo Rubio in 2014. A decent loss to Teco Quinones. I do like Teco. The issue, I think more people are fading Canetti because Canetti is a 37-year-old who's coming off the USADA juice. And it clearly showed he quits in fights. He's been subbed. He got subbed last time out. Rivas is probably the smart play. Canetti came out firing in his last fight. I think he does it again here. And that's why I mentioned him earlier. I think he's an interesting GPP play just because if he wins, it's going to be a first-round knockout. If it gets past the first 3 minutes, Diego Rivas is the play, and you're hoping he scores enough points to pay off his salary. Chris, how are you seeing Canetti and Rivas?
Yeah, I actually like Canetti quite a bit as a dog here. I'm not a fan of Rivas. I think he's another Oyama fighter. I believe I have that, and I just think a lot of those guys tend to wait around a lot to counter, and they're not aggressive enough. We see that with Chito Vera too. That's one of his major problems. Until the third round comes along, and they realize that they're losing, and they say, "Oh, I better step on the gas now." But I think that you're right. I think Canetti is going to come out firing. I mean, if they are friends, I think that's a decent point, and that's interesting because we have seen that before. But I think if Canetti's smart, he's got to worry about his career here because, you know, he's I believe he's lost 2 in a row now, or 2 of his last 3, I think. So he needs to worry about his career. He looked good in that fight with Gong, dropped him or at least wobbled him before getting caught in that triangle. I think Rivas is gonna hang back to start here again, and I think it's gonna give Canetti all the space he needs to do what he wants. And I like him to take home the victory here as a pretty substantial dog.
Joe, you got the Argentine or the Chilean?
Look, I mean, the narrative is this. He's the only Chilean fighter on the card. There are actually TV commercials in Chile advertising, this card with him as the marquee fighter on the card. Canetti is, I think you said 38. He owns his own gym in Argentina. He's one of 2 Argentinian fighters in the UFC. I think your point was he's essentially a 3 to 5 minute fighter. He will come out blazing. Again, I just have to be suspicious and look at what the UFC hope to accomplish here. And if they ever want to come back to Chile, it's not the worst thing in the world to give the one local fighter on the card someone that he could beat. So I am, again, I feel less likely about, Canetti getting the upset. I do see the GPP potential. I do see him as a 3-minute fighter. I will probably be underowned to the field on Canetti just because of the narrative, and I will have probably slightly more of Rivas. But I don't love the fight. I just think the Chilean's going to win.
Now we get into some interesting fights here. Starting off with the big boys, at least for this card, there's no heavyweights on this card, so we'll settle for a light heavyweight matchup between Dominic Reyes at 9,000 and the middleweight, Jared Cannonier at 7,200, who needs to move to middleweight. But he's up there in age. I don't know if he's ever going to make the move. Dominic Reyes has looked really impressive in his first two UFC fights, but he's been can crushing. It's Jeremy Kimball, who's the other one? Johan Christensen.
That's
yeah.
it.
Like, okay, those like he has good takedowns. He has big power. He fought a bunch of cans on the regional circuit when he fought Christensen. I took Christensen because the line was huge on Reyes. Just as it didn't really hurt me because he was like 6,600, and Dominic Reyes was beating up cans. Jared Cannonier is by far his biggest test. The issue is he's going to be so much bigger. Cannonier can't stop a takedown. Reyes has some takedowns in his game. I think that's about all it's going to take. I'll have a little bit of Cannonier because he's the best fighter Reyes has faced, but I've turned the corner on Dominic Reyes. Dude's got lightning in his hands and has some takedowns. He could be the real deal in a division that is desperate, absolutely desperate for the real deal. Joe, Reyes or Cannonier?
Look, I think this is, one of the reasons why I'm not super hot on Reyes is because he has been can crushing. I mean, you want to see that step up. I mean, I am a believer, as you are, that he could be a special fighter. He's got good coaching. He's got, I believe, Joe Daddy Stevenson in his corner. Cannonier has got piss poor takedown defense. My only take here is that I think the finish comes via the sub and not the knockout. Just because, again, I think that is a safer path to victory for Reyes. I mean, look, he can hit. Cannonier has got some power in his hands. He's had some decent fights. He ground down Jan Kudalaba. I had Kudalaba in that fight, but he ground him down and won that fight. Of course, he lost to Glover Teixeira. He probably does need to move down to middleweight. He's fought. I think he entered the UFC as a heavyweight. He needs to move down to middleweight. I like Reyes here. I mean, there are just so many. Like in any other week, he would be such a highly owned and popular option. But I think he's probably my third or fourth favorite fighter in that range, just because of all the guys on the top who I like slightly better, but I do like Reyes here.
Joe, you are Joe. Wow, I am clearly tired. Let's go to Chris for this one. Yeah, I'm a little hungry as well. I'm going out for anniversary dinner and drinks after this. So
congratulations.
Thank you, Chris. So let's so I get to my drinks, and really I want to talk about these next two fights. Drinks can wait, but let's let Chris have his say on Reyes and Cannonier. You got anything controversial for us?
Not very. First of all, congratulations for me as well. But also, what can you even say about Reyes? All of his fights are over so quickly that it's hard to even, we know that he's basically a meme. If you've ever seen that fighter shaking his head no, and then he head kicked him, and then he shook his head yes. So he's a meme on the internet. And, we know he's quick. We know he's got good submissions. But, since time immemorial, how do you take away the offense of a tall, long fighter? You crowd him, and that's what Cannonier likes to do. He likes to pressure. He also doesn't move his head very much, which has been a source of pain for him in certain fights. But what I did like was that in that Jan Blachowicz fight, we saw him not necessarily defend the takedown better, but we saw more urgency to get back to his feet. He had several get-ups in that fight, which is a big positive sign to me. I'm really excited for this fight. I think it's going to be a good big test for Reyes. I think Cannonier is going to be a little too much because we even saw in the Kimball fight for as long as it lasted, when Kimball rushed him, he had a little bit of success. Cannonier needs to be careful that he doesn't get clinched against the fence, which is your typical big man body lock takedown. But failing that, I think Cannonier is going to pressure. He's going to hit him hard with something. And I think he has a real chance to get a stoppage here. I think both guys have a chance to get a stoppage, which makes this a really intriguing fight for me.
Yeah, I agree. It's a good GPP fight for exactly that reason. But now let's get into the next two fights where a lot of ownership is going to get eaten up and a lot of salary. Tatiana Suarez, 9,300, taking on Alexa Grasso at 6,900. I'm going to refresh the page because this line has just been ridiculous. It is, at some places, the highest you can get it. Wow, at some places up to minus 853. for Tatiana Suarez. Guys, I get it. She's good. I totally get it. I'm picking her to win this fight. That is bleeping ridiculous. Alexa Grasso can't stop a takedown. That's why Tatiana Suarez is going to be so popular on DraftKings. She's beaten ABC Cooper, Chris, and she's beaten Viviane Pereira, who's good, but she's so much bigger than these two. For the first time, Tatiana Suarez is going to be facing someone who she doesn't dwarf in the cage. Alexa Grasso is also a big strawweight. Alexa Grasso, if she can stop a takedown, if she's learned to do that, fighters can evolve, she's going to outclass Suarez in the feet. I don't think she does. I saw Joe shake his head. I agree. I'm just laying out a path here because one of my hot takes for this card is going to be I think Usman is a safer play than Tatiana Suarez because he has multiple paths to dominate and score 90 to 100 points. Suarez needs the takedowns. She's probably going to get them. Play her in cash. I'm probably going to have her in cash too. I'm just throwing up the cautionary tale that if she doesn't get them, Grasso's better on the feet. She just is. Grasso's the one who had all this hype. 853 and 9,300, 6,900 is too much. I'll have plenty of Tatiana Suarez, but I'll be mixing in some Alexa Grasso just in case the takedowns don't happen. I see Joe chomping at the bit. Well, we're going to go to Chris. We're going to make Joe sweat a little bit more.
Well, here's the problem. Not only can she not stop a takedown, but she's very accepting of the clinch. We saw that in the Random Marcos fight, and it's really kind of distressing for somebody who's primarily a boxer. You would expect them to keep a little bit better range, but she doesn't. And I think if Tatiana Suarez gets her to the clinch, there's not going to really be much coming back from that. But I like the way that Alexa Grasso tends to use her leg kicks, and especially at the end of combinations. Tatiana Suarez has that sort of leaned over stance to cover a lot of distance. That leg is going to be right out there to get chewed up. If she can land a few, a few, specifically those low calf kicks, we can be looking at an equalizer there. I still think you have to go Suarez here just because, like I said, not only does she have a problem with takedowns, but she has a problem with the things leading to the takedowns. So logic would dictate Suarez, but, if you want to mix it up a little bit, and Grasso has fallen well out of favor, probably rightfully so, but I think she has a chance in this fight, and I think that if you want to, differentiate yourself, save some money, make multiple lineups, that could be a GPP play for you.
I do want to just throw up a disclaimer here that what I and Chris just said is not the popular opinion among most people, among other touts. That is, we'll let Joe bring us back into the more, oddly enough, Joe's going to bring us the more popular opinion on this one. I just the red flags I'm seeing. So, Joe, I now release you to tell us what the conventional wisdom is on this fight.
Well, first I have to ask, what did Grasso do to Dana White? Did she refuse to have cocktails with him or something? Because this is a horrible stylistic matchup for her. She finally sort of got back on track, in her last fight. And here is a very popular female fighter in Latin America. And she is essentially getting thrown to, Tatiana Suarez, who stylistically is her kryptonite. She can't stop takedowns. She is a good volume and technical. She is a good technical striker, but she doesn't hit hard, right? She doesn't finish people, Grasso. So I don't get it. I don't understand why, she's getting thrown to Suarez in this fight. I saw Suarez in Norfolk when she, just dominated Pereira. Again, there are people who are using the term future champion when they talk about Suarez. I think this is a horrible mistake by the UFC, but for reasons we will talk about in the next fight, I do think Suarez is the, preferred cash play on this card.
I will say that I think it's interesting. I think the reason this fight got made is because I'm looking at the rankings. This is the only ranked opponent outside of Nina Ansaroff and Joanne Calderwood who probably needed a matchup, and Grasso wanted to face somebody ranked. I think that's it. Just look at the rankings real quick. The fight to make after this, assuming Grasso loses, is Grasso Mackenzie Dern. Be a really interesting fight.
Fire up those Grassos. Let's go.
Sign me up.
But let's get to the main event. Kamaru, the Nigerian Nightmare Usman, 9,500, taking on the legend Damian Maia at 6,700. How many times, I've said this, I do a couple podcasts and shows, the same line. If you watch any of them, bear with me for 5 seconds. How many times do we have to see Damian Maia against a power wrestler before we all just know what's about to happen? I have a big bet on this fight. The only way Usman loses is he gets caught in the sub, which could happen, but I don't think how he gets this fight to the ground. Usman's wrestling is too good. He's hit harder than Colby Covington. He's very alive to a knockout on the feet. All the paths to victory outside of that fluke sub will lean me towards Kamaru Usman. Maia's taken the fight on short notice. I just think I think he's safer. It's going to be tough to pay off 9,500. I get, but he can get a first, second round knockout. He's incredibly safe. I'm not playing Kamaru Usman in cash. Joe, let it go. Let us know why Tatiana Suarez is a better play than Kamaru Usman.
Okay, so aside from that, look, the salary savings is minor. We're talking $200 here. And again, I like Kamaru Usman to win this fight, and I will tell you why Maia is taking this fight. One is he's had his shot, right? He is not on any title trajectory. He can make a living teaching BJJ seminars. He is getting $150K per fight minimum, plus whatever he might get for agreeing to step up short notice under the table. It's a good payday for him, win, lose, or draw. My hesitation in calling Usman the best cash play is if you look at how Maia fought Covington and Woodley, they were both very successful at stuffing Maia's takedowns, but did not go for takedowns themselves. So my fear here is that Usman will not be his uber aggressive takedown oriented self and will win this via striking, right? Which is not going to yield as many DraftKings points. If we're talking GPP at 9.5K, we essentially need a score of 114 to get to 12X, right? So I think Tatiana is much more likely to get 12X in GPPs than Usman. And because I think, and again, I don't know this, I could be proven wrong, I think that he may be more tentative in going for takedowns, at least early on, that he will not score as well.
It's possible. I think he's crazy safe. Outside of that.
Safety, I don't disagree. Yeah. Safety, I'm talking about scoring at the price.
That's fair. For GPPs, I would. He's Tatiana Suarez and even Felipe Silva in terms of upside are right up there. Chris, bring us home.
I hate this fight. I hate the eventuality that's going to happen here because look, we know basically what's going to happen. As you said in the beginning, you summed it up perfectly, Sean. Another strong wrestler who is probably going to do to him what the other strong wrestlers did. What frustrates me about it is I don't think it will be that difficult for Maia to make his game a little more functional. Like we saw him backing up Colby Covington with strikes in the first round of that fight, right? But he didn't go for a takedown there. He kept striking. If he would just integrate a little bit, I think he would have a lot more success. But that's the end of that little rant. As far as this fight's going to go, look, we're giving Damian Maia 5 rounds to connect himself and find the back. That could happen. But the more likely scenario is, I think, is that Usman stuffs it. Even if he doesn't get the takedowns, I mean, we saw him light up Sean Strickland with his hands. We've seen him do that multiple times in the UFC, and now he's got 5 rounds to do it. I think he scores pretty okay, even if he can't get his takedowns. I don't even know if he would want to take down so much in this fight. But again, I don't really think he needs them. I will be hoping, although not as much now that I know that you have a big bet on it, so I'll root for you, Sean. But I'll be hoping in my little heart that Maia connects because I love the old warriors like that, and I always root for them. But I think logically, we've already seen this fight play out. I think Usman gets it, and I think he's pretty safe everywhere myself.
So that's it for our 13 fights for UFC Chile. Just one thing left to do. Hot takes. I'll start just in case you guys forgot. My hot take is I'm gonna go towards DraftKings scoring, actually. Just with all the potential finishes in this card, I know there's a few fights that could be stinkers. I think the winning GPP score is going to be massive. I think it's going to be 675. That's my hot take. It's 100. And, oh, wait, hold on. Did my math wrong. There's 6 fighters on a card, on a roster now. I was doing really old school.
You are.
So let's see. 6 fighters on a card. What's $1.25 a piece? It's 750. I won't go that high. The winning GPP score is going to be 725.
Wow, that's a hot take.
That's steaming hot.
It's going to take you about 120 points to take down GPP. Plan accordingly.
Wow.
I'm not here to play around with these hot takes. Go big or go home.
So here's my hot take. Okay, my hot take is this: I have a 3. I'm going to say thing parlay because I say thing because I have a 3-part parlay going with 2 fighters and a horse. So I am parlaying Suarez and Usman with Justified to win the Preakness.
That sounds like the beginning of a bad joke, but go ahead.
So that is I have some money in my DraftKings in my 5 Dimes account left over from the Justin Willis debacle. And I am actually putting all of that into, and I don't do units, I'm old school. So I've got like $150 parlay going with Justified to win the Preakness, Usman, and Tatiana Suarez.
He's a pretty big favorite for the Preakness.
He's minus 230. He's minus 230.
Woo.
So he's actually the lowest price. The horse to win the Preakness is lower than either the main or the co-main event winner.
Did you get the plus odds on that? Otherwise, it's not a hot take.
It's I think it pays 2 to 1.
Okay, so
yeah,
we will let that go as a hot take. Chris, this is steaming hot take.
All right. Well, first of all, 2 fighters and a horse walk into a bar, and then okay. But before I get to my hot take, since I know that we're all about fan service here, Danny Ings asked us whether we favor Khabib or McGregor. So. Everybody, just one word. I'm going to
Khabib.
There you go, Sean.
McGregor's Dolly, and then Khabib.
There you go. So it's sort of unanimous. My hot take is that there will be a lot of dead cards for the strap before the main card hits, meaning. There's going to be a lot of weirdness and upsets on this card. I feel like there's a lot of situations on this card where you go, well, this fighter should win, but. And there's so much liveliness here that I think we're going to have a lot of broken hearts before 10 p.m. rolls around.
I don't know if that's a hot take. I got to get you into more of a box or something we can measure and say.
How about this, Sean? You and I both agree that by the end of the summer, that Chris will have a new upgraded Xbox versus the one that's on his drawer.
I don't know about that. I think
rough story.
Yeah.
Chris, how many before the main card? How many dogs win? Let's make it a hot take. If you're gonna say broken hearts and weirdness, how many dogs win on the undercard?
Let's see. Do my quick little count. 4 dogs on the undercard.
4 dogs. That is a hot take.
That is a hot take.
Let's reel it in. Bringing you hot takes and hopefully some good DFS analysis. Again, guys, this is Fight IQ by RotoWire. RotoWire.com/free. Yeah, right. /free. I almost forgot the link. 10 days, no credit card, all the premium stuff. Good luck in your contest for UFC Chile. We will see you next week. This is a great stretch of cards. Can't wait to keep talking.
UFC London next week. UFC Liverpool next week.
That's right.
On Sunday. So it is a Sunday card. Still going to do a Friday podcast because it is an early Sunday card. But the road to 225 is in high gear.
Peace out.